Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Views on VUE. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host. With me today is one of my special returning guests, the guy that I call, help, I need somebody. And he comes on to the podcast with me. Drew Baker, how you doing, Drew?
Great, thanks, Steve. Always good to be here.
Yes, just for a little bit of background, Drew is the Aussie that lives in California who's been living in Europe. So
not anymore. I'm back.
But he's back. He's back in the States after doing some knuckle dragging. Snowboarding. That's what we call the snowboarders in Utah, and then he's back in New York, as you can probably tell by some of the sirens you keep hearing behind him. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I've got a little snowboard trip to Utah, which was incredible. They broke the all-time record for snow the weekend I was there.
Oh, wow.
Insane winter in North America right now.
Yeah, it's all that global warming. I love it. Yeah, here in Oregon, it's been really great with the snow too. I've gotten back into skiing past couple 3 years, and because a buddy of mine, and the snow, we've been getting tons of snow. Some days it's like 2 feet of snow, 3 feet of snow. Last time I was up was about 4 days ago, and tons of new snow. Took my son up. I'm going up again tomorrow. So yeah, it's been really good here too in terms of the amount of snow and what it is for the skiing. It's always nice to get new snow, and especially with the amount we've been getting, that's going to be really great for spring skiing. Here the season generally goes to the end of May. So yeah, it's nice getting all that snow. Every time I look at the temperature, I'm like, what's it doing on the mountain? How much snow are they getting up there? Are they getting new snow? Everybody around here is like, it's cold, this sucks. Like, no, it's more snow. More snow. So, we're going to talk about a couple things today. Drew, as if you're a regular listener, you've heard him, and when we've had Daniel Rowe from the Nuxt core team on here talk quite a bit about Nuxt as he uses it in his day-to-day at Funkhaus. And so, it's been at least 2 or 3 weeks since we've talked about Nuxt. Just kidding. And so wanted to talk about it again. Drew's had some recent experiences with actually starting to use the Nuxt 3 1.0 version and his experiences with it. So fire away, Drew.
Yeah, I thought the real good place to start with Nuxt is the different rendering modes, because that's kind of the main point. Well, one of the main points of Nuxt, if you haven't used it before. It's definitely the way I describe, Nuxt to people that aren't familiar with it over VUE is that, it uses VUE as the templating part of it all, but it's opinionated on the structure of everything. So Nuxt is much more of a website building framework than where VUE is like a component framework or a templating kind of framework, I suppose. And so what Nuxt does is kind of bundle in a bunch of things like page routing and some opinions on how to store state, stuff like that. But the rendering mode, or the options around the rendering mode, is the big thing that you want from Nuxt. And so, let's talk about what those are. So the sort of top level is you have, and I'll go into more details about these and the experiences that I've had doing this and what is the pros and cons in sort of the real world of using some of these things. But you have sort of 5 main ones. You have SPA, which is single page application mode, and that essentially is VUE. I'll get into the details of them all. But the other one is server-side rendering. You'll see it written as SSR, and there's kind of some flavors of that we'll get into as well. Then there's SSG, which is static site generation, and then there's a new one now. There's a new 2 ones with the Nuxt 3, which is ISG, which is incremental static generation. And then there's hybrid. And so those last 2 are really interesting and very useful, and will solve some of the other problems in the previous 3. So let's talk about them. And then the reasons why you might want to use one over the other is kind of important. So I think it's really good when you're looking at any technology is what is the thing you're trying to solve and what is the point, not just using it for the sake of using it. And so when we're building a website at Funkhaus, the thing that we will start asking ourselves in terms of how we're going to host this thing or this website is, is the time to live of the content important? So once a piece of content gets published, either through the CMS, or if you're using like a repo-based content system like Nuxt content, where you can just like leave markdown files in your code, how long is too long for that to happen from someone editing content to being live on a website? Because that's the main thing that all of these rendering modes are trying to sort of solve, is that, combined with, is the time to like interactivity important as well? So if someone comes to your website, do they need to be able to see everything instantly? Or can you like boot up and show a little loading spinner while stuff happens? Even if that loading spinner is really fast, you know, if you're using some like the SPA approach, for example, there's nothing coming off the server really, and it gets all built client side. So there is a bit of a delay there. And that sort of feeds into one of the things that's been the most important and the hardest lesson learned for the work that we've done, which is the SEO factor. Is what you're building need to show up in Google search results? Because if it does, essentially, does it need to be like machine readable or like crawlable by a bot? If it does, then SPA approach is not going to work. So those are the main ones. And then the last one, which is also something to consider, is the cost of hosting, because some of these are significantly more expensive than the others to host, especially at scale, or like, you know, when you have a couple of thousand people a day looking at something, which is something that, you know, not everyone has to deal with, but certainly like the kind of stuff we do, we have to think about that. So that's kind of like the criteria of making a decision. And now I'll talk about the different approaches and how those criteria kind of relate. So the first one, single page app, SPA mode, that is very much just Vue 3. Now you can run Nuxt in this mode as well, and we certainly do as well, if you want all of the sort of like configuration and opinionated benefits of Nuxt. But mostly if you're just running a straight Vue 3 app, just vanilla, like regular style, not doing anything special with rendering or anything, you're probably using SPA mode. And so what that means is your HTML file, like if you inspect the source of your site or of a Vue site, and there's only like one div in there that's normally like ID app, and that's kind of it, and maybe you have some stuff in the head and some HTML, but there's no real like content in the source code, that's an SPA app. And so what is happening there is you're visiting the site, the server gives you this like essentially like an empty HTML file or close to empty, and then client side you load up all of the JavaScript and build out all of the elements, and then load in or hydrate in all of the data. And so that takes some time. Now it's really efficient in terms of server resources because you're only serving a static one HTML file. And if you're doing that, you can post that anywhere. You just put it on, you know, an old FTP site or anything, even something static like Vercel or Netlify would be kind of overkill, because there's no build process to any of that really. You're just serving up an empty HTML file and that's it. You could put it anywhere. But that is not we learned this the hard way at Funkhaus. That is very not SEO friendly. Now, Google kind of makes the claim that they will render JavaScript apps, and I think they have a certain like time. Like if we load it up in a certain amount of seconds, we'll crawl it and use that for search results. In my experience, that is all BS. That we've never seen that happen. We have built huge sites that were running in like SPA mode, sort of counting on that Google sort of lie, and got terrible search result, like just massive drop off in search afterwards, and then convert the same Vue site into like a Nuxt static site or a server side rendered site, and had the search SEO pick right back up again. So it's, if you are building a site that needs to be like indexable, then SPA mode is just terrible for you.
Well, it's by itself, it is. I mean, to go to your point about Google, I'd have to find the episode, but on JavaScript Jabber, we interviewed a Google search DevRel person, developer relations person, and I specifically asked about indexing of SPAs in JavaScript. and I'd have to go back and find the response. But the gist was, yeah, we've gotten better at that.
Yeah, I bet they have.
Because the whole issue, obviously, is, and this has been talked about ad nauseum, everywhere, is that when the page purge slows, there's no data because it has to hydrate. The JavaScript has to go get the data and hydrate it. And so in that time, the Google bots, oh, there's nothing here, I'm going to go away. Yeah, but they've said, oh, no, it's better. We can really do that better. Well, yeah, I've always taken that with a grain of, more like a shaker of salt, not just a grain of salt.
Yeah, me too.
And there's ways around it. At my place, we have a VUE app that's backed by Laravel, and we use RenderTron, which is basically another library that basically creates indexed content for the bot when it comes around. And so when the bot comes around, it sees, hey, here's all this content. Let's index it, even though it's an SPA, but it's a lot of extra work and so on. And I know Netlify has a pre-rendering service, I believe, that you can enable for SPAs that does exactly the same thing. It's going to provide pre-rendered content for the bots when they come indexing. So there's ways around it, but to your point, strictly as an SPA, Google's not going to, it doesn't seem that Google's really going to index it as well as they do a static site or
totally
a
not.
pre-rendered
No, yeah,
site, server-side rendered site.
Yeah, there's always a million ways kind of around these things, and like that pre-rendering part of Netlify is something that we've experimented with before as well. But the other one that depending on what you're building, is just something to think about if you're building an SPA site, is if you want that to be like shareable on like Twitter or LinkedIn or something like, or Facebook, and you want the little preview image to show up and be relevant and with the like content, because really all that Facebook is doing there is reading your source code, looking for open graph tags, OG image, OG title, whatever. And if you're an SPA thing, those don't exist either. And so that's something to consider when you go SPA, which is something that's bit us in the butt before as well. So we don't do a lot of SPA stuff for that anymore. The only ones that when we use SPA now is for apps that require a login. So if we built some like task management kind of apps, and those all can run SPA mode. So that's when I would go SPA. They're really cheap to host, and if they're not needing to be searchable, then that's a great option. So that's SPA mode. Now, the next step up is SSR. Now, there's a million different terminologies for all these things, but in the Nuxt world, SSR can kind of mean a few different things. But essentially what it means is there's a node server somewhere that is rendering all of the HTML and then giving that to the client. So when you request a website, there's a node server that builds out all the HTML and sends that as a file to the user. And so you're basically getting a HTML file, and then Vue loads up client side. So all the interactive stuff happens. But the HTML file generally, and should be, if it's in Nuxt, it needs to be unchangeable for the first initial load. So, there's some considerations when you're building those things, like the real common one that we like a Nuxt rookie will do is like build something that relies on like window size, and if the window is greater than 750 pixels wide, go to 2 columns or something like this, right? And if you write that in JavaScript, Nuxt will have a real problem with that, because when it builds on the server, there is no window. So it's giving you this static file with some assumptions on window size being nothing. And then it gets to your browser and you have a window size and things change and it doesn't like that. So those are like the mindset that you have to get into when you start going away from SPA and into like server rendered stuff. So server side rendered, what we will use that for is when a client comes to us with a site that has a requirement for time to live of content to be like 0. They want to click publish and it shows up on the website. And that is like really popular in big media websites, big news websites, or those are the main ones we've used it for, or e-commerce. It's important as well. But so like if you look at any of the stuff that we've done, Flood Magazine or Torment Magazine, big snowboard magazine actually, those are, Flood is actually server-side rendered because they publish music news and it needs to be really instant. And then Torment, they're okay with there being sort of a 5 to 8 minute delay. A bunch of snowboarders, we're not not really. We're okay. We can be chill. That can be static. That's a static rendered one. So the main reason that you would want to be SSR is for speed of publishing. But the downside to SSR is it's of all these hosting options, it's the most expensive one, because you have to have a Nuxt service or a node server somewhere that is handling all the requests and can deal with the traffic. Now you can put all that behind CDNs and different caching strategies and stuff, which we've also done, but it's no way around it. It's way more than like the other hosting options we're talking about in terms of the cost. But it's great for SEO because the server is just outputting HTML all the time. So whenever Google or any of Twitter or Facebook or anything crawls the site, they're just seeing like complete site code. So that's been great for that. So for in our case, like we host a lot of that stuff on Heroku, but any kind of node server scenario would work for that. Yeah, so that's SSR. Now, the next iteration of all of that is called SSG, which is static site generation. And that's the one that was like popularized by Netlify and Vercel. And that's like very Jamstack evolution.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, the Jamstack acronym right there, right?
Yeah. So what that means is, and it's a little bit of a mind bender for us JavaScript client-side people, but what that means is in the Nuxt world is Nuxt has a built-in crawler. Now you could do this without using the crawler eventually, but the crawler sort of was a iteration that made this really user-friendly, which was you code out your website in Nuxt VUE, deploy it to your GitHub repo, and you could even just run this locally in Nuxt. It's npm run generate, and what it does is it will load the first page that it knows about, which generally would be your homepage, like your index.vue file, and it will look through the source code from that output and look for all of the Nuxt links, which is Nuxt version of like router link in Vue, and follow that to the next URL and like build out a list of all the URLs it can find on the website, and then statically generate the HTML for every one of those pages. And then save that in one folder, in a distribution folder, just dist, in the case of Nuxt, like defaults. And so you'll end up, you can look at it, it's really interesting. You'll end up with like, it depends on how big your site is and how many page routes you have, but thousands of just HTML files. And then that goes on a CDN, in the case of Netlify and Vercel. And whenever a user requests a URL, the first thing they're given is just a static HTML file. So that, and it's pre-built and everything. Like if you as long as you haven't kind of made some mistakes, what the user will get is the first page of the website. And then from then on, you're browsing around the website, clicking on links and stuff. It's all client side. And all of that is happening client side. Now, and if you've done it kind of the way that Nuxt wants you to, you'll never even hit the API behind the scenes. Like if you had it connected to a CMS, you'll never even hit any of that. It's like serverless. It's just static files, and Nuxt does a whole bunch of magic to kind of like bring down just the JavaScript you need for the page you're looking at. So if you're like, on the home page, it doesn't load the contact page JavaScript. So it keeps everything very chunked and minified and all that stuff. It's brilliant. It's very smart. But the beauty of this is you get the advantage of SEO because it's static files. You get insanely fast time to interactivity because like what the
crazy
user
fast. It's crazy
it's
fast
amazing.
because it's already right there. You don't have to go get anything. It's already there.
It's amazing. And you get a really, really cheap cost of hosting because you're just serving up static files from a CDN. So there's no hosting really behind the scenes other than this initial build time. Now, depending on what kind of website you're building, that build time can be nothing. Like if all you're doing is updating a site once or twice a year and the content doesn't change very much, you don't need a CMS of any sort. Maybe you, depending on what you're doing, like a lot of people might, it's very common to use something like this for docs for like a plugin or like a script that you've built or something, you're not changing that content very much. And if you are, you're changing it in a repo. So Nuxt has a whole thing called Nuxt content, which is like markdown files that sort of serve as like a CMS. It's brilliant. It's really smart the way they've done it. So, if you need to change something, you're just changing it in a CMS and then deploying it. So you could just be deploying static files all the time if you wanted to host it on just like a CDN style host. But we use mostly a CMS. SSG is really, really fast, and the time to interactivity is crazy because you're giving out straight HTML to the user, and so there's no load time while you're waiting for an SPA to boot up. That all happens in the background, obviously, but it's booting up what you're already looking at. So it's very, very fast. So then the other thing to think about is how you're getting content into this. So if you're just building a website like a docs website for a VUE plugin or something, which is quite common, you can store your content in the repo, in your like code. And Nuxt has a whole module for that called Nuxt content, which is just like markdown files. And so then your CMS is essentially lives in your repo. And so then whenever you generate a new version of your site, you're just deploying straight static HTML. So you could do that in just a CDN type environment without any kind of node server or anything, because you could just run it locally and then just like upload HTML files basically. But for what we do at Funkhaus, 99% of the time we have a CMS connected to it. So we'll have a backend running, and then when you upload your repo to Netlify or to Vercel, what it will do is it will boot up a node instance on Netlify and start crawling every page of the site on Netlify and copying down that HTML and leaving it on Netlify and then deploying it. And so you have like a connection between Netlify and your CMS to say, whenever my CMS updates, hey, Netlify, rebuild. And that has a huge advantage in that you're hiding the backends. So like a lot of the times the like vulnerability and the security of things is the servers. People, hacking in, like in our case, if we're using like WordPress as a CMS or something, there's a big concern about hacking WordPress or like, breaking into our CMS. That is all very hidden. Like publicly, it's not even accessible. Or if it is, it's only one endpoint that is accessible and everything else is locked down. So you get a big security boost when you go SSG as well, because again, you're just dealing with static files.
Yeah, I've done it both ways. I had one little blog site where I used, it was just little blog stuff. So I used markdown files in my editor and, commit those to the repo, the GitHub repo, and that would trigger Netlify, and Netlify would build it, and, you're off and running. And I have other ones, that's the Nuxt 2 site, that's backed by Prismic, an online, CMS. And I, do my content in there and set it up, and it builds, and fast as heck, secure, and does everything I need. And then I just use, there's like a contact form, so I just use the built-in Netlify Forms capability for that. Netlify handles that for me, and so yeah, it's fast, it's quick, and even has a little bit of interactive functionality built in.
Yeah, the interesting thing about, you mentioned Prismic there. Prismic is an incredible CMS. That's a static generated headless CMS, which is weird to think about. Whenever you update something in Prismic and you also like click deploy, I think that is even the word they have, or publish, what that is doing is it static generates the API. So, which is wild to think about. So your publishing content on Prismic is working very much the same as the static site on Nuxt. So the whole thing is like just static files, even on the front end and on the API end. It's just so fast to do that.
Really, I don't understand that. Explain what you mean.
Yeah, I know
Prismic.
it's mind bending. So whenever you change something on Prismic, it generates static JSON files of the API.
Okay.
So, like when we build a website, the static output is a HTML file. Well, could be just a JSON file, right? And that's what it is. So whenever you're like querying stuff on Prismic, really what you're getting given is static JSON files.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's why the Prismic API is insanely fast.
Oh, okay.
It's wild. The static site generation thing is like a real. I don't know how it can get faster than that, because it's the theoretical that you're just passing around files. So,
and then what's even more interesting you can do is I investigated this for another site I was working on for a small business, where you can set up webhooks between Netlify and Prismic, so that anytime you make a change in Prismic, it automatically rebuilds your site on Netlify.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to manually go in and rebuild every time you change content. So for, when you're doing something for, a non-technical user, a business owner, all they got to do is go in, change their content. Okay, that's good, save. And then nobody has to go in and build, or you don't have to do it, or you don't have to set up fancy scripts. You just point your webhooks at each other and it does it for you.
Yeah, there's a bunch of developer experience stuff too that comes out of Netlify. I mean, it's hard to talk about this without just coming off as this giant ad for Netlify, but it's pretty good to work with.
Just to clarify, we are not sponsored by Netlify at this time.
No, not yet. In fact, it's the other way around. I spent a ton of money with them. But anyway, so the downside to static site generation is time to publish. Now, what that means is if you like for example, before I was talking about Flood magazine, and then the other one, Torment magazine. So Flood is server-side rendered, it's hosted on Heroku. When they publish something, it appears instantly. Very expensive to host, and has to be able to handle the traffic and all this kind of stuff. And we have to have some specific like CDN layers in front of things. And we're using like a GraphQL CDN as well called Stellit to handle like all the traffic that they can get. Torment, hosted on Netlify. Now, they have, like, Flood has about 10,000 news articles over years and years and years of publishing content. So when you publish something in static site generation mode, what it's doing, as I said before, it's crawling the site and collecting all the URLs and building all the pages. Now, even if you have each one of those taking a second or 2 seconds to build times 10,000, you're talking about 10, 20, 30 minutes. So once a new piece of content publishes, you've got to build every route, unless you get real granular. And you can control this stuff if you want to, and get real granular about, like, when this page changes, I only need to generate these kinds of pages. And it gets really complicated. Just out of the box, it's going to build every page for you. And so when you're dealing with pages with lots of page routes, it takes forever. Like in our experience, most sites that are running in SSG mode take between 2 to 10 minutes from when a new piece of content changes to the site going live. And depending on what the client and what the contents of the website is, that might not be a problem. Most people, if their website takes 10 minutes to update, doesn't really matter. But if it's like timely stuff like news or anything like that, it's a problem. Now, in the Torment world, they're okay with 10, 12-minute build times. It's fine. But that's the big advantage to SSG, which gets us to the next one, which is like, oh man, I wish there was a sort of a combination of both, which is the new in Nuxt 3, and that's called ISG, which is incremental static generation. I'm not actually sure if this is in Nuxt, like the like released version. I think it's in release candidate. I certainly couldn't actually find anything on their Nuxt.com about this yet, but I have seen the GitHub commits for it and Daniel Rowe and a bunch of people talking about it. So if it's not in Nuxt yet now, it's coming very soon.
Well, just to interrupt here, Daniel just messaged me right before we got on.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if you saw the message that I put in the chat, but he says it's implemented. Said I'm not sure if the docs need to be updated, but basically it's done with route rules. You set SWR to true, or to a number of seconds.
Nice. So there you go. Breaking news.
Breaking
no,
news.
It's definitely not in the docs yet. So how to enable it, I'm actually not sure. Like there should be there's a configuration. It's also not in the docs called target, and in your Nuxt config file, if you set target to, it's probably ISG, but I couldn't find the docs on it. And then set up your route rules for it. an SWR, what he's talking about there is called stale while refresh, I think. That's what that means. And so what that's saying is there's a couple of different ways to configure ISG, but before I get into that, what is ISG? So what it means is when you come to the website, if you're the first person to look at it, it will be building it and giving it to you. So the first time up, you'll basically get a server-side rendered, an SSR version of the site for the first person. So that has all the downsides of SSR, which is like server load, and there's a little bit of time there because the server has to build it and give it to you and all that kind of stuff. But the next person will basically get an SSG page. So, if you're okay with the first person being slightly slower, and then when I say slower, we're talking about, 100 milliseconds, like we're talking small.
Right. Almost not humanly noticeable.
Yeah.
Right.
Is the idea. Yep. After that, it's static file all the way. And so you get the benefit of both without having to have the build times. And then you can handle, that's what the SWR setting is for. What happens if that page doesn't exist? Should we rebuild a new one and give it to you, or should we give you the old one that we used to have while the new one before, so you can handle those scenarios in a way that makes sense for whatever it is you're building. Like if you're okay serving up the old version, then there will never be any slowdown, because we're building it as we go. So that is the holy grail at the moment, is these ISG approaches. And then the final, so the downside to ISG is going to be the hosting setup. Now, they've gone to a lot of effort to get this working in Netlify and Vercel and everything, so you can have the static hosts work with this using like all of the serverless functions that they provide. So the hosting costs won't be as significant as SSR. They'll be very similar to SSG if you use this, which is very exciting because the Netlify hosting is so cheap. I just, for some comparison out there, we host, I think, a couple of hundred websites at the moment on Netlify, and it's like a couple $100 a month, and that's because we're using all these team functions and stuff because they kind of bill you per seat. But on Heroku, it's so expensive. It's 20, 40, 50, couple $100 per website, depending on how much traffic you get.
Oh, geez. It
gets real expensive. And then when you're using Heroku, out of the box, you don't really get any kind of CDN or caching performance or anything like that. So for us, we have to put that stuff in front of it. So we have like Cloudflare in front of some of this stuff, and it's even more money. So like, I'm very excited about ISG. It's like one of the main things that I want out of Nuxt 3 is ISG. So
the first place I remember really seeing that done, because that was sort of the holy grail for a long time from the static sites, is the rebuild. If a smaller site, not so big of a deal, but when you get into larger sites, then it's an issue. But the first place I really remember seeing it implemented, sort of the first to market, for lack of a better term, was Gatsby. And it wasn't with the self-hosted. You had to host it on Gatsby Cloud. But when you did, then they had the capability to do incremental builds. And I know it's been coming along in other places since then.
Yeah, I know Next, like most things, like Next.js had it for a while, and now we get it in Nuxt. But that's exciting. So then the fifth mode that's worth talking about that you can do in Nuxt 3.2 is called hybrid. And so hybrid rendering is, what if you have a website where you have a bunch of marketing pages and then you have a login page, and then after the login page, it's all protected. So you'd want to be able to configure certain routes to have this one be static rendered, this one to be SSR, this one to be SPA mode, and pick which parts of the website should be rendered in certain ways. And that's what hybrid rendering is. And you can do that through configuration in Nuxt 3, which would be useful for anyone building, sites that have a login component that also have a big static component to it, which would be most like e-commerce sites and things like that would have that. So that's the sort of overview of all of the different rendering modes in Nuxt and websites at the moment. It's complicated, but it's good to have options.
So here's a question. I never really heard this described well, and I'm sure the descriptions are out there. What is it about incremental rebuilds that make it so difficult?
Yeah, that'd be a good question, I guess, for Daniel and the Nuxt team. But as far as I understand that to be, it's you can imagine from the server infrastructure, like what is going on there. Like when it's static generated, the server is not really exposed to the public, like it's like in Netlify's case, your node server is not publicly accessible other than through serverless functions. And so when you visit a website, you on Netlify, you're just getting given static files. But if we want, so that's easy to do. And then if you're like server side rendered, like Netlify isn't doing that. They don't, I imagine like they don't have any infrastructure to handle that. That was all like Heroku. So you kind of have both. Like I've hosted static on Heroku because essentially you can just upload files, and so you can do that on Heroku. But on sites like Netlify and Vercel, like they were never thinking that this stuff would be publicly accessible beyond serverless functions, which, for other people listening is like Lambda functions and stuff, like these one-off function-y things, not handling like user traffic, And so I think combining those two things is tough because like we got to serve up this static file, or let's generate it and basically put that static file in the distribution folder, So there's a lot going on there, and like all the config that goes with it, like when is this stale and stuff, So I think that would probably be my main guess as to why that would be complicated. But yeah, fascinating question. I'm sure the Nuxt guys would have a lot to talk about.
Cool. So I think we covered all the modes, or did I miss one?
They're the main 5, I think. There's sort of other smaller versions and different subsets. Like, for example, you can run Nuxt in SPA mode with server-side rendering turned on, which does some weird stuff. It depends on what you're trying to do there. But the main 5 are the ones we covered. That's certainly the ones that we use for most of the work we do.
Yeah, I know. Now, some people like to use Nuxt in SPA mode, like for, say, an internal tool where SEO doesn't matter, hill of beans, because of some of the built-in features like the routing, right? You're based on folders and directories, and some of the other internal tools like that, even though you're not using, as a server-side tool because of SEO, but that gives you some features where you don't have to, define all your routes in your routes files and so on. So I've seen that, and I've worked on sites like that before that sort of mix things that way, just because it takes a load off you in some areas of configuration and setup.
Yeah, then we've done that. We built this big task management app called Polaris. It's for like the construction industry, and that's how we did it. It's a Nuxt app that's running in SPA mode.
Cool. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about before we wrap things up is VUE 3. I'm a little late to the game, although I try not to be too much bleeding edge. I bleed enough as it is. I don't need any more cuts from new technologies. And so I've talked about it more in JavaScript Jabber, but I have a project I've been working on for past 2-3 months for an organization I belong to, a nonprofit. And it's just sort of an internal CRUD app just for managing membership and payments and that kind of stuff. And so my tool of choice has been Inertia.js, which is, for those of you who haven't heard me talk about it or are not familiar with it, is sort of a glue, allows you to plug and play between front and back ends, and does it in a way that's super fast because short description is it sort of hijacks your post request and communicates between the front and the back end, either with props and using some headers, so that it doesn't do a page reload. So all you're basically doing is updating the content that you want to update on the site without sending a full page reload and page refresh. So it has adapters for the front end for Vue, for React, for Svelte, and then backend libraries for Laravel, for Ruby, and I think there's ones for Node now. So you could mix and match Ruby with Vue or Svelte or React, or you could use Laravel with any of the 3, depending on your comfort level. And the docs really aren't that extensive. if you look at the inertiajs.com site, because there's not a lot to it. It's not like a framework. It's not necessarily a library. I think of it as a glue between the front and the back end that handles a lot of things for you. My combination of choices, Laravel and Vue, and and then what's nice is that Laravel, if you remember listening to my interview with Taylor Otwell, the Laravel creator, back a few months ago, talked about their distributions like Jetstream and Breeze. And so Breeze now is, you can install it, and it has inertia built in. Then you tell it, okay, I want to use Vue for my front end and Laravel for my back end. Well, it is Laravel, so you're already using Laravel. And then, builds in Tailwind. And then what's really nice is they went away about 6 months ago, I think, roughly. They went away from Webpack to use Vite. So now it's crazy fast on the rebuild. I mean, I'm noticing when I'm working on it, I will make a change in a file, and even before saving the change, my page will be updated with what I just put in. So it's pretty fast. And so everything is geared towards Vue 3, and I hadn't really used Vue 3 that much, so I sort of took the plunge and been using Vue 3 with Laravel. I think I'm on Laravel 9 right now. Laravel 10 just came out, but I'm still on 9, and then Tailwind. And some of the things, definitely take some getting used to in Vue 3 versus Vue 2. How props are defined, how events are defined, the whole setup script. It was initially, script, and you had, was it script? I think it was type equals setup or something like that. And now the script section is just script, script tag and then setup in there. It's not like value equals script or something. It's just an attribute, basically. And so that makes things a lot more simple for writing your code. But it's nice that it's more JavaScript-like, for lack of a better term. Because you just declare a function. My function is this, a method. You define your your props, or your data values. Before in Vue 2, it's data is a function that returns an object that contains your different reactive data values. Now you just define them. Const my value equals whatever it is, but then you wrap it in the ref. So there's the ref wrapper that makes it reactive. There's ref and reactive, and there's minor discrepancies between the two in terms of objects versus scalar values and when to use one or the other. There's whole blog posts and documents written on that. But it's pretty easy and clean to read. You're defining your props. It's just a method. Find what your props are. They become automatically reactive. So yeah, it's pretty cool. One of the things I noticed was one thing I'd often wrestled with a functionality is how you can define, and this is all documented in the Vue 3 documentation, is how you can bind elements between a parent element and a child component. So the classic example is where I have a table, and I want to have a filtering field that makes a call to the Laravel backend to get paginated data based on what I've typed into my search field. Now, the interesting thing about inertia, and you sort of have to understand this in order to work with inertia, is that the way that the data is passed from the backend to the front end is via props. It uses the inertia library that you install for Laravel and Vue in your Laravel controller method, or wherever you're returning your data from. Could be in a route definition as well, if you want to be really simple. Is you say inertia render this page, and you pass in the path and name of the Vue component that you're communicating with, and then you define the props that you're passing back to your component. And so this works only for components that are under the pages directory in your JavaScript structure. Well, let's say you have, let's say I have an index component. A user index is a pretty straightforward one. And then you have a table that's a child component of that index. And your search field is in the table, component. Well, you have to have the data pass from the parent index component, not within the table itself. And that's above where your search field is, because inertia, again, is you're specifically saying, okay, pass up to this component. You can't pass it directly to the table component. So now you've got to have that binding between the search field in your child table component and the actual method in your parent component that's communicating with inertia on the back end. Does that make sense?
Like, my question is, what is the output from inertia then? It sounds like it's actual HTML, like, or is it JSON that's getting passed into the VUE props? It's replacing parts of the page by the sounds of it.
Right. It's a standard VUE component with your template and your script and everything. You just get the data passed in as a prop, and that's reactive, and then you do whatever you need to do.
So Laravel is like outputting HTML in this scenario?
No, just data.
Yeah,
in an array format, and then it converts it to JSON.
Yep.
That you read within your VUE component, and then all your templating is done in your VUE component.
Yep.
Or your front end component, whatever
and so
it may be.
And inertia is just sort of syncing up that data that's coming out of Laravel and like putting it into the right props in VUE, basically.
Yep, that's exactly what it's doing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, one of the cool things I finally got my head around in Vue 3 is how you can easily sync between the parent and child component. And it's documented on the Vue 3 documents. I can put a link in there. But what's really nice is that once you use emits and props and events, and you have to have them named in certain ways, certain names have to match up. So, my parent, I'll have a table component, just call it table, my table, whatever. And I'll have a prop that says, this is my search field. This is the text, right? And then you set a watcher on that search value in your parent component. Then in your child, you use that search as a prop, and then you emit event anytime it changes. So then it's synced with the search value, data value in your parent. You set a watcher on that. It does its thing with inertia and then passes it back. So everything's synced up nice and neat between a parent and a child. It was real easy to do. To me, it was easier than it's done in Vue 2, having something like that. And I'll have to look up the term in the docs. But yeah, that's one cool thing. One thing that inertia has that's really nice is a form helper that's built in, because forms are such a prevalent part of any type of data bound application like this one. And so you basically there's a form helper that's built in that you import in your component, and you use it, and you say const form equals form whatever, and then you put all your data values in there. So then you can bind your individual text fields and text areas and selects and that kind of stuff, just with standard Vue vbind to your form dot whatever, my form dot name, my form dot address, my form dot city, whatever, and that makes it dynamic. So it's all contained in this form variable wrapped by the form helper. And then in your submit function, all you do is do form dot submit to URL, and it handles everything else for you and passes it to your controller, whatever's getting the post or the get or the put on the back end. So it wraps it all up for you. You're not having to do a lot of the old manual work of synchronizing forms and setting it. And then there's other parameters that you can pass to the form method that says, okay, don't reload everything, right? Preserve state, preserve scroll. And then there's even, like on success callbacks. There's all kinds of callbacks you can use. If it's taking a while, you can show up, a file or some sort of status method. Hey, this is still loading. All kinds of little helpers. And it just makes form handling and updating of the page much, much easier and very quick. So it's really pretty slick. And then what I thought was interesting, I haven't played with this much, and I know it's a user thing, is they have, obviously, primarily this is going to be a SPA type of application on your front end, but they have a server-side rendering plugin or capability that says server-side rendering pre-renders your JavaScript on the server, allowing your visitors to see your website prior to the JavaScript fully loading. And it uses, so you have to have a node on your back end, wherever you're hosting your particular site, to be able to handle that. But it's built into Breeze and Jetstream, the Laravel distributions. I'm not sure about Ruby or React or any of the other distributions or or setups that are out there. But it's pretty painless to set up, it looks like. And then, but it gives you that server-side rendering capability along with the speed. But the one thing I've noticed, like I said, is in the using Vite, just your development speed is so much quicker in terms of page updates. Because I wrestle with Webpack updates all the time on my day-to-day work, and it's painful. And then, but the way that Inertia handles everything, the communication, once you actually make a request, is just amazing how quick it is and easy.
I'm jealous of the form handling stuff you're talking about. That's always annoying, especially when you're like in my world, we do a lot of stuff in GraphQL, and so dealing with like a select drop down that is populated from data coming out of GraphQL that's generally in a different shape than the data you need to submit back. It's like very annoying. So that sounds
there's
useful.
And the form helper has some helpers built into it for things like if you need to map over the data, maybe what's in your data needs to be tweaked a little bit before it sends to the back end. So it there's some features like that, but it makes it nice in that it's only updating what it needs to. It's not generating your whole page again with a full post request or stuff like that. So anyway, it's a pretty slick little tool.
So
I love using it.
Feeling good about Vue 3 then?
I'm getting more comfortable with it. I haven't. I can remember talking about when Vue 3 first started coming out and was a thing, and the big. At least one of the talking points for the composition API as compared to the option-based API is in terms of organization of code and how you group everything together, and you can have separate organizations, and now you have composables and things like that. Some of those things I really haven't taken advantage of yet, maybe just because I'm still getting used to Vue 3 and haven't really needed some of that, I don't think. I can see how you do it and how some of these things could be useful, but I haven't really dived into that extent of it yet. I'm sure I will down the road for sure.
Yeah, my experience with it actually is pretty limited so far because we're so reliant on Nuxt for all the stuff we do, and Nuxt 3 having just sort of come out recently, we started moving. So we have a boilerplate that's open source that we kind of use for the starting point of all the websites we build. And it's on the Funkhaus repo if anyone wants to check it out. And I started the sort of process of making the Nuxt 3 version of that for our team. And just quickly ran into some roadblocks of things that we took for granted that aren't really ready for Nuxt 3 yet. Some community modules, like the big one being Storybook. We use that a lot. And as far as I'm aware at the moment, there is no Nuxt 3 Storybook integration. So kind of like hit a roadblock pretty quickly. And then the other ones being sitemaps are really important for us. Being able to generate a sitemap, it's a weird thing that might not be important for a lot of people, but for us with SEO stuff, it's really important. And there's no good there's no good sitemap module yet. So got to wait for that. And then the other one is we do everything in GraphQL, and there's a few different GraphQL solutions out there, like Apollo being the real popular one, but I hate Apollo. Had such hard time with that thing. So we use one called GraphQL Requests, which it's actually written. Well, the Nuxt version of it is written by an Australian guy who's does some really good work. Gomah, Gomah, is his GitHub user. Anyway, that's not out yet for Nuxt 3. That there is a GraphQL Nuxt 3 thing out there that's pretty cool. It does some interesting stuff. Basically, like imports all your GraphQL queries as functions. So it's kind of interesting. It's a new approach that I hadn't seen before. But it's pretty opinionated. You end up with a bunch of functions in your code that you don't know where they came from, and you just have to know. All the ones starting with GQL mean that they're GraphQL queries, but they look like functions. Right. And so I'm a little scared of that. It just can look, I don't know. Whenever I see like a function that I don't know where it came from or where it's declared, and it's just like magically injected, it starts to get confusing when you're dealing with big websites like that, so it's sort of a little scary. But I like the developer experience there. It sounds easy, so I have to sort of look at that one a bit more. And then there's anyone else out there that's dealing with Nuxt sites, there is a plugin function called Enable Preview that basically you can use to put a static generated or server-side rendered version of Nuxt into an SPA mode just on one request. We use it based on a query string. So if the query string has $preview in it, then load fresh data from the API. Don't load the static stuff.
Oh.
Which is really important for like previewing content out of a CMS. And
that's cool.
I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you do previews in Nuxt too, and I can't find the Nuxt 3 version of that yet. So those are the 4 things out there that I really need working in Nuxt 3 for us yet. So it's still a bit early. And then as you pointed out there with Daniel and the ISG stuff, the docs are still early days. I mean, still so much better than most docs, but there's still some important things kind of missing that can be a little bit confusing. So it's still a little early for us, I think, for Nuxt 3. But end of life for VUE 3 is like the end of the year. So like we're all having to kind of move eventually.
End of life for VUE 3?
Well, end of support for VUE 2.
VUE 2. Okay, you said VUE 3.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, end of VUE 2 is the end of this year, I think. So
end of support, or are they just not developing it anymore?
No more developer for it anymore. Like no more versions, I don't think.
Right.
So
interesting.
Not that I sort of needed new versions of VUE recently, but that's happening.
Cool. Alrighty. So we covered quite a bit of ground here. Again, a lot of basic stuff, but hopefully useful to some people out there. I always enjoy talking about inertia and VUE for sure, just because of how nice it is and how inertia handles quite a bit of things for you and does it very quickly too. So with that, we'll move on to picks. Picks are the part of the show where we get to talk about things other than VUE, or we can talk about VUE and tech if we want. Just depends on the day. I'll go first today. Granted, I'm doing the high point of every podcast before we get to the guest, but I think Drew understands that. One was an article that was brought to my attention by Chuck Wood, the guy who owns Top End Devs. It's from the British Psychological Society, so it's very proper and scientific, and it's about the awesomeness of dad jokes. It's called Dad Jokes. That's the way I roll. That's EYE roll. And it just talks about really some sort of scientific studies about dad jokes and why dads do them. And one of them, I thought the most interesting things, conclusions in the article is, do they serve a pedagogic function? I think I said that right. In other words, do they help your kids learn? And so this paragraph says, in light of this, it's worth considering dad jokes as a pedagogical tool that may serve a beneficial function for the very children who roll their eyes at them. By continuing telling their children jokes that are so bad that they're embarrassing, fathers may push their children's limits for how much embarrassment they can handle. They show their children that embarrassment isn't fatal, which is something I prove on this podcast every week. So anyway, it's sort of funny to see a scientific treatise on dad jokes.
Oh, so you're now backed by science.
I
Steve.
am backed by science. And my when I showed this to my daughters, like, oh man, my family, like, oh man, that's just gonna give him more incentive, So,
yep.
Please, Dad, stop telling the dad jokes. Hey, I'm backed by science.
Yeah,
I
good for you.
Here, read this, right? So, and then speaking of the dad jokes, it's time for the dad jokes of the week.
Oh, you're just going to skip over my picks? We're going straight into...
No. We're going to go to...
We'll do dad jokes first. All right.
Yeah. That's why I said it'd be sort of a letdown afterwards.
Yes, nice.
Don't take it personally. and by the way, I do have to say that last podcast when I had to drop out and you, Daniel, took over, I'll give you an A for effort. And right. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you.
Listeners will know that I appreciate the cow joke when it comes to dad jokes. So my new one is, what do you call a group of cows It's a bit of a stretch, but just roll with it. What do you call a group of cows playing poker on a mountaintop?
Oh, I don't know.
A high stakes game. Right? And then, switching to movies, there's supposed to be a new time travel movie coming out next year. It was actually pretty good. Right? And then I got a call from a school the other day. They said, your son has been telling lies. I said, tell him he's bloody good at it, because I don't have any kids. Thank you. Those are the dad jokes of the week. So what do you got for us for picks, Drew?
Not as good as that. Just a really interesting thing we've been doing this week at Funkhaus. We've been playing around with variable fonts, which, if anyone's not familiar with what those are, is, normal font file will have a bunch of variations. You'll have, regular, italic. You might have, even more oblique or even more angled ones. And then you might have like bold and regular and medium and super heavy and these different weights. Well, what variable fonts are is a font that there is no set, variations, and there's no set weight. It's a scale. So you can control how thick it is all the way up. It's not just like in increments. You can go one pixel at a time, basically, in weight. And same with slant. So what angle, like you don't have to just be like italic. You can be 0 degrees, 1 degree, 2 degree, you can go negative and positive. And so you can have the fonts go in all kinds of directions. Very useful for just like the size, because you only need one font file. You don't need to load all these different variations, but also allows you to do some really cool stuff, like change the weight of the font and change the angle and all this sort of stuff based on different effects. And like, so we're building a website for a client that is called Magnetic Fields. So it's magnetic. And so we've made the font sort of follow the cursor around like a magnet, and so it moves around and looks really cool. So variable fonts. And there's a website you can see this in action that's also just a really cool website to look at, called gt-planar.com, planar.com. And that's the name of the font. And it's a variable font, and they've built this like cool microsite that shows off all of the different things you can do with it, and it's pretty cool. It's worth checking out.
Oh, wow, that's an old school website.
Yeah, it looks like a sort of Star Wars-y video game from the 90s, but it's all showing off font. It's really cool.
Reminds me, that or Asteroid. Well, no, not quite, yeah. So it's only this particular font that is variable?
No, this is the first time we've used one, but there's a bunch of different variable fonts now, and I believe, I think the future of web fonts will be all variable eventually.
Oh. Yeah, it's all ball bearings these days. We quote, if anybody knows what that is, you get bonus points. Alrighty, so with that, we will wrap up this episode on VUE. Thank you for coming at us from the wilds of New York. And good to have you again. And we will talk at y'all next time on Views on VUE.